Thank you all for your patience in waiting for during the break time. We will now start the second session, which is on low carbon economy for green growth. So on to the next session now. I would like to invite the convener of the conference, Professor Amitav Malik, to please give a brief idea of the second session and set a tone for the second session. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Siddharth. Let me once again welcome everybody to the second session. We ran a little late with the first session, but that's okay. It was very informative. The second session is about low carbon economy for green growth. The green growth word actually is a tricky word. The whole point of going green is to not to spur the growth, but to moderate the growth in such a way that it will not hurt the environment. Having said that, there are many ways of doing that, and that therefore the whole focus of this session will be on looking at ways to reduce our load on the environment and yet manage to grow.
Sir, perhaps Dr. Ashok Khosla cannot hear us.
Yeah,
so it would be better if we move on to the next presentation, I suppose.
Meanwhile, try to help for Dr. Khosla so
yes.
that we can take the last concluding talk of this session.
Yes, sure, sir. My team will get in touch with Dr. Khosla so we can figure out his technical glitches.
Do you have Dipak Dasgupta logged in?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. Perfect. Let me just quickly give you a brief introduction and then we can move on to your talk.
That's fine.
Dr. Dipak Dasgupta is a distinguished fellow at the Energy and Resource Institute in New Delhi and the lead author of the upcoming UN IPCC report. He has been an advisor to the national and international organizations and a lead economist at the World Bank. I now invite Dr. Dipak Dasgupta to give his talk on green investment mechanisms and performance indices. Over to you, sir.
So I'm going to turn on my screen and hopefully this one works. First of all, my thanks to Professor Malik and PIC and the climate team for inviting me to this talk. And this, I'm in Washington, DC right now. So I've managed to get up early to hear the first part of the conference. And I thought it was excellent. Gives us a great introduction to talking about the low carbon growth. So let me turn to my slides. So the topic of my is on the green investment mechanisms to accelerate low carbon growth. One of the things that I'm going to talk about in this is I decided I'd take a longer view of what is coming up and India's role in the global low carbon transition, as it were. And I've always hesitate to talk very long term. Last time I had to write something in 2007 or 8 about what India would be like in 2022, which is the 75th year of India's independence. And I made some forecasts of where we would be. And as usual, forecasts can be wrong, but we are not that far. So with that introduction, let me talk about the challenge. I think the long-term challenge.
You, sir, but are you sharing a presentation with us?
Yes. Can you see it?
We cannot see it at the moment.
Okay. Let me try sharing. Okay. Sorry. So the challenge that we have is to be able to mainstream India's long-term climate ambitions. And I'm only going to talk about the climate part of this. And it is quite clear that India's political bureaucratic leadership, which is the Prime Minister's and Prime Minister's office, Niti Aayog, who we heard in the morning, earlier in the afternoon, and Ministry of Renewable Resources and Environment, I think that leadership in India understands quite well why low carbon sustainable growth makes long-term sense. And I'll talk about intuitively, I think people in India understand much better than most other countries as to why we have to make this low carbon transition happen. And in fact, India is right now judged as the best performer in terms of being able to meet the Paris commitment goals by 2030. And we are actually doing better than the EU by all performance metrics. And we are doing much better than China and the USA. And this is coming from various observers looking at how countries are doing. And in terms of our goals by 2030, I don't think we have a problem. We're likely, thanks to our rapid renewable solar deployment targets, which is 175 gigawatts, and then 450 gigawatts by 2030, 40% non-fossil fuel generation capacity by 2030. We're already at 38%. So by all indicators, India is going to meet all its commitments by 2030. So, but the issue, therefore, is the focus of my talk is beyond 2030. What are the challenges that remain? And linked to those challenges for India is the financing issues. How are we going to be able to do the investments that's needed beyond it? So right at the beginning, I should mention that despite our progress, quite dramatic progress we've been making in India on a low carbon transition, that there are still elements of the framework within government, which is Ministry of Finance, Commerce, Power, State Electricity Board, Steel, Coal, Energy, Agriculture. They are more agnostic, undecided is what I would describe many. So it's not a uniform, and therefore the focus must be on translating leadership, intuitions about where India needs to be. And that really comes from the people, intuition that you've got to go to a low carbon thing, but to translate it into actions and instruments. And that's really what I will talk about. I should also mention that while the key role that's played is not just government, but it's also the private sector, as we've heard earlier in the afternoon. And there we do have some immediate problems because we have an industrial business finance, I call it lobby, but really it's a large grouping. And these are actors that are still divided and are facing very large risks after this pandemic that India is and the whole world is going through. And I would guess, my guess is about 2/3 of this very important industrial business finance world in India, that's not India as a whole, that's a part of India that's very important, still views a shift to long-term growth as a possible threat to their existing incumbent business or activities. And this is a threat, in a sense, it's a real threat. It's a threat in terms of the declining value of their investments in fossil fuel use capital. So this is, think about the steel plants, the auto plants, the cement plants, the energy engineering companies that have already invested and are using fossil fuel. There's a declining value to this invested capital if they make the low carbon transition. So that's a challenge for them. There's a loss of rents, stranded assets, as we are describing it in economics, in coal, gas, mining, power. They already have large assets which are going to lose value if we make a transition. So that's a second kind of threat to the transition as they see it. There are financial risks. Banks and financial institutions are exposed in terms of massive investments that they've made in financing these entities. So that also is a risk. And there is entry threat. So if we shift to a completely new low carbon future, existing businesses see it also as a threat to their long-term. But at the same time, I think it is also the case that existing entities also understand that they're facing some long-term global risks. These are the risks from changes in the trade arrangements globally that will happen as the world heads to a low-carbon future. There's technological changes. So imagine that if you set up plants that are based on fossil fuels and a new technology comes along that replaces that, then we are going to lose competitiveness, we're going to lose foreign investments, we're going to lose. So in a sense, one of the first challenges in this slide that I talk about is how do we mainstream the influential actors in the country to go towards where I think people are already convinced, which is the afternoon that we talked about. I think more and more people are convinced that we need to go to a sustainable future. The challenge now is to get the collective key actors to be moving in the same direction together, collectively restart. One indication of this is when we had Atmanirbhar Bharat, which is a main kind of, in a sense, it's a bellwether of where India might be headed. We talked about raising coal use and coal gas. So in a sense, coal is in the play very much in India as we expect. And there's debate and tension about how much the recovery process will go back to coal or not. But the latest Atmanirbhar Bharat version 3.0 is now talking about championing 10 sectors. Two biggest of those sectors were advanced batteries and electric vehicles, or electric vehicles, and solar PVs and green energy. So there's this dilemma, this tension is happening, but at the underlying it is the challenge is that India's future is going to be in a sustainable future, and the more we get policy conviction on that this is the direction that India needs to go, and the strategic consensus and financing is really the biggest hurdle. Let me go to the second slide. So the question for us is, at the very beginning, is why do we need to push long-term low-carbon growth when India faces many other challenges? The climate is not the only challenge in India. We have some fundamental challenges in food, agriculture, water, nutrition, equity, poverty. So these are challenges, but the reason is there is no other better choice. And this, why do we think that the low carbon transition is the best choice for India? Thinking long term is essentially the entire world's global economic system is trying to convert in a massive way in a technological shifts. And technological shifts happen in human history from several reasons. It could be demographic shifts that are coming, which is happening in India. It's coming from the need or the push for sustainable economic growth to happen. It comes from political and other innovations that happen, and it comes from urgent social needs. So all four, in a sense, these are the factors which are accelerating for a technological break. Now, once the low carbon growth shift starts to happen, energy using technologies in every sector will change. It's not as if we can kind of do it just in solar renewables. It's going to change, and it has potential from farming, as we heard about earlier, and it's going to take place in water use, it's going to be in electricity, it's going to be in transport, it's going to be in industry, it's going to be cities. It's like, imagine when first electrification came in the late 19th century, the whole world transforms itself once you get into a new technological pathway. And if we are able to, if the low carbon transition doesn't work for some reason, and there are lots of risks that I'll talk about why it may not work, if it does not, if we don't succeed globally, then the consequence for India will be amongst the worst in the world. The sheer size of it, you think of how the pandemic has played out globally. The two places where the pandemic hits hardest, not surprisingly, is US, which is in a sense the global leader, if you will, on the technological side, but it also hits very hard. Amongst the hardest is India, and essentially because India is such a giant country and size of the population, that if the world fails to make it, India also fails to make it. So in a sense, we are tied in with the planetary consequences much more, I would imagine, than anywhere else. And while it is correct that we did not cause the problem, in a global sense, we did not cause the problem, there is no escaping. There is no escaping the issue that India's size and energy growth ambitions as it play out between now and 2050 makes it imperative. So the slides on the right-hand side that I show Is there drivers of technological change? It's possible to go into energy transport. It'll affect everything. And if it works, then we are going into a global middle class wave, as people have described. This is a chart from a paper done in 2010, which shows where India is the blue curve, and India's blue curve actually overtakes China and almost any other place in the world in terms of the size of the growing numbers of people. And if this works, then we end up with the part where India accounts for something like 15% of the global economy, and China is another 20. We are back to a world which it was in around 1500. India is a player, and we have no other better choice than to be joining this transition long-term, much faster and much bigger way. And so on to the next slide. How is all this going to play out on the energy side? So imagine this, India is going to be the second biggest electricity demand producer in the world between now and 2050. And you can see terawatt hours. China is at the beginning, at the top, but India just behind it. And India's electricity demand forecast that's going to come is going to be 10 times bigger than the change in demand that's going to happen in the EU as a whole, and 10 times bigger than in the US. It kind of dominates. China and India kind of dominates the horizon as we think about it by the year 2050, between now and 2050. So, as I said, up to 2030, we're going to be overshooting our targets in some sense, easily achievable. The challenge is that it's going to be, as you look further out to 2050, the transition, India becomes the key player. India's main energy resource at this time is coal. And coal is not going to disappear because there, as I said, there are threats, but its growth will slow dramatically. That's the slide on the pictures on the right-hand side, which shows you that coal will not disappear, but coal use is going to slow dramatically. And how is that going to happen? Electrification with solar and renewable energy is really the core of this long-term India's energy transition. It has to be in wind and solar, and renewables is going to drive it. But the investments, if India is going to succeed towards this, is going to be a massive. It's going to be a scale of resource needs around just energy sector alone is going to be around 2.8 trillion. And the faster we start, the better it is. And to the next slide, this is the path of India's GHG emissions that we think is possible. And if you look at the slide on the top slide, on the right-hand side of the presentation, we are looking at the reason business as usual, in a sense, even if we do the transition by 2030, or we are succeeding to it, we know by 2050, the combination of India's population growth, which is so massively built in, there's not much we can do about this, is going to be up 50%. So if we were at 1.3, 1.4 billion, then we're going to add another 700 million to population. And that's about 1% per annum, and it's highly probable, very unlikely to shake it. And we have a GDP per capita growth, which is forecasted around 5.5% a year. It essentially means that it's going to be left to itself. India's energy GHG emissions will absolutely blow out over the 2030, 2050 period. But it's possible to get it down. And that's why the long-term transition storyline has to begin now, resetting our priorities and how are we going to do it. Even if we did it, if we were able to do it, then we can stabilize India's GHG emissions at around 2020 level, which is a 40% emissions intensity. And with renewables and carbon capture and electricity and industry emissions decline really being the central parts of it. So it's going to be a wholesale change in the way that India uses its energy and its technologies underlying it. And it's going to be so That's the challenge. That's the path. It is possible to still end up, even if we do this, with, I believe, unlivable air, unless we can also address the fossil fuel use in transport emissions dramatically and drastically starting now. So we can't wait for things to evolve without starting to take actions, long-term actions now. And pathways to 2030 is only part of a minor challenge to me. And what would it take? I'll end this.
Sorry, sir, 15 minutes.
Slide. Yes. Yes.
Could you please conclude your talk?
Yeah, that's my concluding slide. Let me finish. So we're going to be 5 instruments and actions that are critical. So the first is pricing instruments. India has done well. The chart on the slide shows you that the price of renewables are falling, but we're going to have to combine it with quantity regulatory instruments, much more dramatic, setting targets for industry, buildings, transport, metro, railways, urban development. And financing is going to be critical. We're going to have to ask the rest of the world for multi-sovereign guarantees on India's borrowing. India is going to need to borrow massively to do this financing, not going to happen without the rest of the world coming along with us. And the challenge is to build that strategic conversations within India and across India, and we do that. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Dipak Dasgupta. This was a very insightful presentation on India's responsibilities on developing very sustainably as a large developing nation, and also its comparisons with China. So, yes, if you have any questions. Sorry?
I said no, I just wanted to thank Dr. Dasgupta for that very insightful understanding of how the financing will work.
Thank you, sir. I would now like to move on to the third presentation for the session, which will be given by Dr. Peter Heck. So Dr. Peter Heck is going to talk about integrating circular economy in industrial ecosystems. Dr. Heck is the managing director of IfaS Institute in Germany, which is the Institute for Material Flow Management. And he's also a professor at the Trier University of Applied Sciences. He has a vast experience in designing and implementing circular economy, environmental policy, and sustainability strategies at industries globally. I now request Dr. Peter Heck to give his talk.
Well, good afternoon to everybody. I'm happy to share this conference. Thanks to Professor Malik and to the organizers to have me in this conference. And I hope I can contribute some ideas from our 20-year practical work on circular economy. I want to start with sharing the view of my campus at the greenest university in Germany and number 6 in the world. Of course, I'm proud of this, but I'm not telling you this because I'm proud of it, because I'm telling you this because it's very much connected to circular economy, because our low carbon situation, actually our zero emission situation, is organized by a very intelligent circular economy approach on our region. We are using the wastes from our county and from our companies to supply heat, electricity, and cold to our universities. 3,000 people for 20 years are living with this waste turned resources, and we have not higher costs than the surrounding systems. We have the same costs or even lower costs. So this is already a kind of direct approach to what could be done, what can be done. And if you look at what's happening, if you talk about circular economy, then it's of course the economic things with regard to zero emission and CO2 reduction. I think it's fine, but we also have to look into the economics, what the previous speakers mentioned. So what do we get? By using waste as a resource, by being carbon neutral, we get 35 new jobs in our region. We get a 40 million euro investment. We have a yearly maintenance effort, which goes to craftsmen in the area, creating value. We have energy independence. We don't care about Mr. Trump raising costs. We don't care about anybody raising costs for energy, because we have our own waste-based energy supply. We have jobs and green affordable energy. We have 2 companies paying local taxes, and just by the way, as a side, on a side mentioned, we are solving our waste problems because the waste is now resource. This, for me, is circular economy, and this we are doing all over the world. Talking about circular economy, what do we mean? It's decoupling of economic growth and development from the consumption of finite resources. It sounds simple, but we all know the devil is in detail. It's about managing materials more intelligently. So we have to follow the materials traveling in our systems. We have to know where they are, what they are doing, what they are costing us, and how we can optimize them. We have to break away from the linear take, make, dispose mode to the closed loop economy. Yeah, and the principles for this is design out waste. So for us, for our institute, for my students, waste is a no-go. Waste is an unused resource, a non-monetarized value. And if you look at waste from this point of view, then you are a manager. If not, you are just an administrator. And administrators are not changing this world. Managers are changing this world. Build resilience through diversity. Work towards using energy from renewables. This is a no-brainer. Think in systems. You all know we educate our students still in linear ways. Very few universities will educate system thinking people. So we have to become better in this. And think in cascades. Before you throw, before you burn, before you dig something or you bury something, you have to think about, can I extract a valuable item out of it? This is cascade thinking. Well, we are adding value to our society by phasing out waste, by phasing out wastewater, by using renewables, by inviting people to share these huge investments needed. And we had the previous speaker very clearly showed this for India, this trillions of euro needed to change society. This money is not supposed to come only from the big guys. We should also invite the small guys to invest and share a part of this new venture. So I give you an example. We are doing this every day, 24/7, all over the world. This is a county nearby here. And they came to us telling us we are having 300 million euro costs for use of fossil energy sources. So we gave them an idea how they can switch from fossil, this is the left pillar here, to the right pillar to renewable, and how much they can do. They followed our advice and did what they are doing today. Every year, they have 40 million euro. It's only 100,000 people in this county. 40 million euro added value money. This is new money in the county. This is saved money from not buying fossil resources. This is gained money by organizing new ventures. This is earned money by servicing new technologies. And this all you can combine to the added value, and you can really measure it. And this number was checked 3 times by our government because they did not believe it. And now they know it. This county now is the most affluent county in all our state. Before it was the poorest county in our state. So switching systems to renewable energies, to low carbon, can be very beneficial. And one thing is also very important. We all think on a macroeconomic level, but for me, the small systems, they matter. So the local money should stay in the local systems as long as possible to create as much value as possible. If poor people quickly spend their money, then the money is gone. They should think about how they could invest money, keep the money in their villages to let the village economy grow. And we have a famous proverb from one of the founders of the cooperation movement, Mr. Raiffeisen. He says, the money of the region for the region. You also could say the money of the company for the company. Yeah, and follow the money flow and try to optimize the euros as much as possible, as long as possible, before you hand it on to somebody else. This is also something we are doing. So basically, switching from linear to circular means switching from a waste society to a zero-emission society. And a linear consumer society basically has inefficient systems. We all are part of very inefficient systems all around us. Yeah? Unused potential. There's a world of unused potentials around us. Poor innovation, cost-intensive structure, and high environmental impacts. So all the emissions we have is not only polluting the environment, it's also emitting potential revenues. So we are actually flushing revenues down the toilets by not using the resources in wastewater and waste. A circular prosumer society. So not only consumers, a consumer is also a producer. So it's a prosumer society. Efficiency matters. Optimization matters. transsectoral strategies, so crossing the boundary between waste and wastewater and energy, cross-sector coupling, new value chains, and regional development as a resilience engine. Well, if you look into company, the companies, of course, if we talk about talking about industrial systems, the companies matter. And the companies have a tremendous amount of potential to lower carbon emissions and add value to their companies. And we develop a kind of stepwise procedure. First, the 15% reduction on emissions. This is a no-brainer. This is just by small behavior changes. The next 30% is the so-called low-hanging fruits. So simple investments, nice paybacks. The next 10% already gets more challenging. It's payback is longer, more than 2 years, more than 5 years. So you have to ask for new financing tools which exist, but you have to run for it, you have to work for it. And then the remaining 40% maybe, which you cannot do by simple mechanisms, you have to have a strategic planning, maybe you have to relocate certain production units in your company, you have to cooperate with a neighboring company. This is getting more difficult. Or you have to organize PV on your roofs, you have to organize biogas as a part of your waste management. This is a little bit more complicated, but it's already the last 40%. The first 60, for me, it's low-hanging fruits, easy things. But even this is not happening if we look at the companies. And we have been working for the companies all over the world, all places, only not India so far, but all around you. And so far, we never met a company who's really perfect. Some are better, some are worse, but all have rooms for improvement. So in IT section, we can optimize 75%, lighting 70%, heat processing 30%, air conditioning 65%, pumping 30%, compressed air 50%, building environment up to 80%. So this is a standard knowledge. And it's more or less goes for all the companies in the world. So this is for all the young students looking for jobs. Go for the companies and develop systems for them to change this, to make money, and then they will leave some money for you to make a nice entrepreneurial living. Let's talk about pumps, for example. We change many pumps all over the world, and pumping change makes sense because 20% of the world electricity demand goes for pumping. And then if you look what kind of pumps we are using, they are normally old, they are not properly used, not properly maintained, and they normally are pumping the wrong material at the wrong time. So this is a lot of nonsense happening. So if we only focus on pumping, we could already contribute a lot to carbon reduction and a lot to saving of energy and a lot to adding value to the company and society. Many examples for this, like you see here, we always ending up with big analysis ending up with the savings. So we show the people, look, you save so many US dollars, net savings. Of course, carbon emission reduction is happening, all this, but the savings matter for the CEO and the CFO. They only will do it if the savings are there. They don't care for the climate change so much. They look for the economics. So we are working with economics, or this is basically for water saving in companies. So we payback, payback this is a very nice payback. Those paybacks already get a little bit like for big companies like a hobby-like system because you want to pay back in 2 years or 3 years. So we have to change the kind of business behavior of those companies. They must accept paybacks of 6, 7, 8 years to install a sustainable mechanism, a sustainable management of resources. 8 and 7 years is also fine, but the banks must accept that the companies are going to invest in optimizing their systems, a payback of 6 or 7 years, or even 1 year if you go to China. And this is not enough to make a sustainable change because you have to significantly invest in changing the metabolism of those companies. Of course, we have to think about waste. Waste management must be resource management. Waste, to my opinion, is a management failure. It's educational failure. Waste is only the wrong material at the wrong time at the wrong place. So we phase out all those landfills. We go for industrial parks. Industrial parks, they are processing our so-called waste into resources. They create jobs, they reduce CO2 emissions, they create secondary resources, and all this is a part of circular economy, of course. Same with wastewater. Just to give you an example, the blue part is an existing wastewater treatment plant. We switched this wastewater treatment plant to a energy positive wastewater treatment plant, means a carbon neutral wastewater treatment plant, by adding the red parts. So we modified it from an aerobic treatment to anaerobic treatment, basically. And this means we changed the old status here to the new status, energy independent. And you see there's energy consumption changed a little bit. The power production, the old status is 0. It's just consuming energy. The new change system has a power production, which is higher than the consumption, means we can sell energy even. So the wastewater treatment plants become energy producers. They are contributing to your carbon reduction targets. They're no longer putting a load on these targets. And then, of course, the costs. These are costs you have here because you use energy, you're not selling energy. Here, you use less energy, and you're selling some energy, so you have lower costs. And this translates in this situation. This is a base situation of all our climate change investments, what we have. The business usual scenario at T0 today is normally more sexy. It's supposed to be cheaper, but look at the development. This is a 30-year development. So this treatment plant is cheap today, but it's becoming more and more expensive because only costs no income. Inflation, labor, energy costs, chemicals. And our new treatment plant has a higher investment because we're using new technologies. We use our engineers. We need to pay them for designing it. We have to buy new technologies. So we have a higher payback. The higher payback is putting a load on our economics in the first years. But you see how this develops. After 15 years, here we have a situation of payback, and then this is to say a never-ending saving. So we can give the people cheaper treatment costs, a low carbon emission or no carbon emission wastewater treatment system. So we use money and we use the ingredients of the wastewater more sense making. So we use our brain to handle wastewater, and this is something we need to change all over the world. And India with so many people, you have so much wastewater. China has so much wastewater. Europe, so much wastewater. If we just change this, it's a major contribution to global warming, avoidance of global warming. Air conditioning, a tremendous energy demand growing all over the world. And guess what? Those air conditioning systems are very, very inefficient. Most stupidly planned, most stupidly used, and money burners. You can easily reduce consumption by 52% or 65%, and then you have a payback of lower than 4 years with the half of the energy demand, with the same convenience, the same service, or even better service. But you have to go behind the scenes. You don't believe what people tell you. They're always lying about the material flows. Either they don't know or they don't want to tell you. So we have to train our students. They must be investigators. Don't believe, take your own notes, your own data, and calculate. And then finally for Germany, because we heard so many interesting things about India, which is for me very interesting because I don't know India so much, but there are studies for Germany telling us that 100% renewable immediately today, if we did it today, it would be more beneficial for our society and cheaper than constantly changing from fossil to renewable. Fraunhofer Institute, this is a big research organization in Germany. They gave us 2 studies already in 10 years ago or 8 years ago. One is for electricity and heat, total switch to renewables. The costs would be 120 billion euro a year. Operation cost of a new renewable system. Today, our fossil system costs us 121 billion. But the difference is the quality of the money. This money is costing for importing fossil energies, emissions, not really adding value. So it's just costing us. This money here is a payback on loans which we got from banks to install technologies, now creating jobs by doing so. And these technologies are avoiding CO2 emissions. They give value to our regions because we have to totally refurbish our environment to collect renewable energies. So this money, from a value point of view, it's a totally different value. This is an investment paying back in the future. This is only costing us here and destroying our environment. I think you have the same situation in India. We have to think about what quality the money has, what we are injecting into our economy. Here, if we include mobility, heat, electricity, mobility, it's even more interesting. See, this is a yearly cost if we did this with 100% renewable energies, and this is the cost we actually have. Why is the difference much bigger than here? Because we are driving fossil engine cars, cars powered by fossil engines. Efficiency is below 18%, below 18%. So 80% of the fossil fuel we are wasting. They should put a warning on every fuel station, you're going to do something really stupid by fueling your car with fossil, with fossil fuels. Because it's a very wasteful thing. I'm not talking about CO2 emissions and the money you're wasting as well. That's why if you change to renewables, the economics are really interesting. And this is an 8 years old study, so it's today even much better because, you know, the costs for electric cars are lower and the costs for renewables are lower.
Sorry, sir, but your 15 minutes are up. Could you please conclude your talk?
Yes, I will finish 2 slides. This is basically what Germany needs to invest to keep up with the 2-degree target. And if we do so, then we have this huge investment here. You know, this is investment and this is the payback. The investment is a limited thing and the payback is without limits. So if we invest this, then the society will be richer in the future and the money will come back in many times. So basically, climate change threatens our existence. Nobody's listening. You see those old guys sitting there, they're sleeping. Climate change threatens economy. People are really getting nervous because economy matters, money matters, and the good story is, to my opinion, is the better economy. Thank you so much for your time and attention, and of course, I'm happy to take all questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heck. That was a really good presentation and an insight on why circular economy is such a good economic option for us. Thank you so much, Dr. Heck. So our next presentation is going to be done by Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. Let me quickly introduce her. So Dr. Priyadarshini Karve is the Director of Samuchit Envirotech and National Convener of the Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change. She's actively involved in impairing education on sustainable development and climate-friendly lifestyles, and has been honored by several national and international awards. She will talk on leveraging low-carbon economy for green growth. Unfortunately, she could not be with us live today, so she has sent us a recording of her session.
Hello, I'm Priyadarshini Karve, and I'm going to talk about how we can leverage low-carbon economic considerations to move towards green development. So let me share my screen. I represent Samuchit Envirotech and Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change, or INECC. Although we may use the words like green development or whatever other fancy term, essentially what we are talking about is sustainability. And this is the popular depiction of sustainability, 3 circles intersecting with each other. This creates a few false impressions. Firstly, the circles are not really equal in size. Secondly, they cannot exist independently of each other. The real picture should look something like this. There is a big circle of the planet. People are part of the planet, and economic activity or profit making is something that, one of the things that people do. So if we change this perception, we can automatically see that in any conflict between economy and environment should be prioritized. If we think of the economic system that we are operating under at this point in time, it's only 200-year-old. in 19th century, after the Industrial Revolution, the kind of companies that we see around us started emerging. Now, at that point in time, these companies were blatantly profit driven. Think East India Company, for example. They had no issues in exploiting people as well as exploiting the environment in order to make profit. So throughout the 19th century, the business world sort of operated in this conflict of environment versus social welfare versus economy or versus profits for the businesses. And profits for the businesses were continuously being prioritized. This started changing in the 20th century because people revolted. The empires shrunk. Ideas like labor rights and human rights started emerging, and therefore the businesses were forced to become people friendly. So without losing the focus on profit making, how do you deliver social good? Some businesses have actually tried to make this happen, but most businesses have just focus on creating an impression of being people friendly while continuing to prioritize profit. And of course, the planet continued to be exploited throughout the 20th century. So we have seen this conflict in the 20th century, environment on one side and economy wearing a welfare mask, and this is what was called as economic growth or economic development, because there was a tacit assumption there that if economy thrives, then social good will automatically be delivered, but we know that that doesn't happen. But that's how the conflict was played out, and again in this case also the economy continued to be prioritized. We are now seeing the next step in this process, where there is outwardly an acceptance or a realization that business activities, while making profit, should also be people friendly and planet friendly. And again, several businesses are genuinely trying to make this happen, trying to achieve what is called as the triple bottom line, whereas many businesses, or I should say majority of businesses, are essentially indulging in what is called as greenwashing, where you create an impression that you are being planet friendly without actually doing anything about this. So this is the tussle that is playing out in this century, and terms like green growth emerge from this, and that's why I feel a bit uncomfortable about using that terminology. But keeping that aside, with this background, if we take a step back and try to think about what should be the agenda that should drive the business world in the 21st century. The 21st century agenda actually has two parts to it. The one part is ensuring decent quality of life for all, which is not really a 21st century agenda, it's an all-time agenda. But one agenda which is very specifically 21st century agenda is that of addressing climate change. We now know that the very existence of human civilization beyond this century depends on our ability to avoid catastrophic climate change in this century. So we need to move to a fossil fuel free economy by 2100. That's what will avoid catastrophic climate change and ensure our continued survival. As far as decent quality of life is concerned, our first global attempt in that direction was the Millennium Development Goals. But there a fatal mistake was made of not even mentioning energy as a part of that. That entire framework was succeeded by the Sustainable Development Goals framework, SDGs, which do include a goal focusing on energy. There is a sort of a consensus among development professionals, experts, that affordable and equitable access to a minimum level of energy services will move us fairly close to actually ensuring decent quality of life for everyone. So energy is a key factor there. But how do you reconcile between these two things? Because right now, about 85% of the energy that we use globally is coming from fossil fuels. So on one hand, we need to broaden the energy usage, but on the other hand, we need to move away from fossil energy. So how to reconcile between these two? That's a big problem, and the whole thing becomes even more complicated because of the business agenda, which is still stuck in the 19th century and continues to focus on profit making. It is my submission that the solution actually exists and everybody is aware of, but what is lacking is the will to acknowledge that solution and to start moving in that direction. The solution that I am talking about is localization. It's time for us to change track and move from globalization towards localization. If we localize our economic activity, then businesses would be catering to local communities by using local material resources, local energy sources, and local human resources. How does this help us achieve the 21st century agenda? If you are using local material resources, your supply chains are shorter, your energy demand also goes down. But more interestingly, you start seeing as a business that it is actually more profitable to conserve your material base rather than exploit it. That's an important shift in thinking. If you want to localize your energy use, then unless you are in a place where fossil fuels are actually being dug out from the ground, you have to shift towards decentralized renewables. And in order to make that shift effectively, you have to adopt high efficiency. So your operations will become more efficient and therefore more profitable by making this transition. If you are relying on local human resources, you are participating in equitable wealth generation, and you again start seeing that having a happy and healthy local community is essential for you to continue to make profit. So these shifts in thinking will ensure that while businesses are finding it very hard to give up their prioritization of profit making, now the profit making itself depends on conservation of the environment and delivering social good. So that is why localization is the solution that we need to implement. However, I must point out that what I'm talking about here is a sort of a globalized localization. Firstly, this local is not defined by political boundaries, but it has to be defined by ecosystems. So, for example, slogans like Make America Great Again or even Atmanirbhar Bharat do not represent the local that is being talked about here. Here, local means, for example, the watershed of a river, which may transcend international boundaries. So that's an important point. Secondly, this localization cannot succeed unless there is globalization of knowledge. So we actually need more collaboration and more cooperation globally in knowledge accumulation, preservation, generation, transmission in order to make this localization happen. So these are important points according to me which don't get talked about enough. So essentially, this is a transformative change that needs to happen. And change like this doesn't happen overnight. So what are the baby steps that we can take at this point in time in order to start moving in this direction? And that is where the so-called low carbon economic considerations come into picture. I believe that urgently we need a massive campaign for raising climate literacy in general public. At the same time, we need a major push for making carbon accounting a common business practice. Business decisions should not be driven only by cash flow considerations, but also by carbon flow considerations. These are the two things which need to happen in the next 5 to 10 years. In that sense, I'm calling this urgent. Another thing that does need to happen, but it is not as urgent as perhaps these two things, is formalizing climate education. And this has to start at the higher education level and then move down towards school level. What is today happening is we are not doing enough for the urgent things. And as far as formalizing climate education is concerned, not enough is happening at the university education level. A lot is happening at the school education level. So our kids know more about climate change than the adults. And what is happening as a result of that is that children are coming out on the street and demanding that their future be protected, whereas the adults who have the ability to do that are clueless and don't know what to do. So it's actually cruel to talk about climate change in a school classroom when it is not being talked about in, say, an MBA classroom. So that needs to change. This is one area where the approach has to be top to bottom rather than bottom to top. So this is a sort of a 4-point low carbon agenda, which I believe will get us going towards that particular goal of sustainability or the so-called green development. The two organizations that I work with, Samuchit Envirotech and the Indian Network on Ethics and Climate Change, we are trying to do our bit in all of these areas, but we are a small group of people. We need more people to join us in this campaign. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. That was actually a video presentation from her. If she's available here for the question and answer session, please stand back because we have Dr. Ashok Khosla with us, who's ready now to give his talk. So Dr. Ashok Khosla, if you're available, I'm happy to introduce him. Dr. Ashok Khosla will be talking about developmental alternatives for resource conservation. Dr. Khosla is a former member and co-chair of the UNEP International Resource Panel and chairman of Developmental Alternatives. He's internationally known for pioneering and contributing to sustainable development. It's an honor to have you here, sir, with us. I kindly request you to give your talk. Over to you, sir.
So I was going to share with you a few ideas. And, you know, I come after such a distinguished set of colleagues who've talked about virtually everything that needs to be talked about. I will try and move fairly quickly through what I was going to share with you, which adds only a few points that are, I think, important, but by and large, it will be a bit repetitive, and I hope you will forgive me for that. I'm going to talk about the resource problem, its impacts very briefly, and the causes behind it. Some sustainable solutions, though Peter and others have covered a lot of those, and so I won't go into too much detail. And then the whole issue of resource efficiency, which is not just about energy efficiency and carbon emission reduction, but actually it's about material efficiency, because all the energy, virtually all the energy that we use other than for lighting and a little bit of heating, is for moving things around. And so, you know, it's largely a question of reducing material use as much as energy, reducing energy use to get carbon emission reduction, and what kinds of policies. So let me talk about the resource issue. We live in a very rapidly urbanizing world. In the last 100 years, you know, construction materials have been extracted at a rate 34 times what they were 100 years ago. Ores and minerals, 27 times, biomass, 4 times. And the total material extraction leads to GHG emissions when it's extracted and used by a factor of 13. Now, in the 21st century India, there are basic facts we cannot ignore. Population will be growing to 1.6, 1.7 billion by mid-century. Per capita consumption will continue to grow at rates 5, 6, 7%, maybe more. Poverty and hunger are pretty well endemic. We haven't been able to solve them in 70 years. And in fact, they are probably as bad, if not worse today, in numerical terms, in absolute terms, as they were at the time of independence. And then,
Extremely sorry to interrupt you, sir, but we cannot see your screen.
You cannot? You cannot see my screen?
Could you please share it again?
All right. Can you see it?
Yes, it's visible now.
It's visible. All right. I'm not going to go back to the beginning, so let me just continue from here.
Sure.
So basically, what I was saying is that India faces some pretty heavy-duty challenges on economic, on social, and on material development fronts. And we're losing ground on every front, including topsoils, forests, and a variety of other things intensified by climate and biodiversity crises. Resource use usually goes up. Material resource and energy resource use usually goes up pretty well, inexorably, logarithmically, exponentially, as things grow. And we talk about the Kuznets curve, that it comes down after a while, it flattens out and maybe even comes down, but it is not showing any signs of that at the moment. So whether it's poor countries like Ghana or Vietnam, whether it's growing countries like China, Brazil, Thailand, or it's rich countries like France, Switzerland, or USA, resources just keep growing. And India is pretty well at the bottom end of this. So, you know, if we follow the normal development patterns, we will be really obliterating the planet with our need for resources. The reason that I would like to suggest a few additions to what has already gone on is, as I said a little earlier, when you talk about carbon emissions, you talk about energy, and when you talk about energy, you're talking really fundamentally about materials. And our calculations show that material use has not only got to slow down, it has to come down by a very, very large factor for us to have a sustainable future. At one calculation, we feel, my colleagues in Germany and in Europe and in India feel that it has to come down by a factor of 10 if we have a fighting chance of a sustainable future. I don't know what happened here. I'm stuck. Materials, metal, this is a graph of metal use by country. These are the countries on the right-hand side. This is the amounts on the y-axis, and different kinds of metals on the x-axis. And you will basically see that India is way, way down in terms of its use of metals. The world average is way above that, and of course, modern industrialized nations use far, far more. And we are now living in, as I said, a very rapidly growing urbanized world. We're going to have 3 times the area under cities in 2030 that we had in the year 2000. And that means that roughly in those 30 years, we will have rebuilt a whole new city world that existed at the time. This is a famous graph made famous by Bill Gates, which shows that in the 3 years, 2011 to 2013, China used more cement than US did in the entire 100 years of the 20th century. So you can see basically that things are rapidly increasing. What's going to happen with India? Because India is going to need to build even more buildings and infrastructure and so on. So let's look at the impacts. The impacts are, as you all know, extinction of species, climate change, desertification, resource extraction, massive destruction of the environment and of landscapes. Basically, our natural areas and resources are under great, great threat. And people's lives are totally disrupted by displacement from where they used to have livelihoods, lives and livelihoods to now. And then, of course, there's also the question of depletion of resources. Topsoils, phosphorus resources, phosphates, fish resources, water supplies, virtually everything is under major threat of total depletion. And the way we're going, we're also choosing technologies and approaches that lock future generations into these patterns, not just for decades, but possibly for centuries. Our roads, networks, the way we use energy and materials is actually binding future generations into non-sustainable ways of living. What are the root causes of ours? I think previous speakers have covered them, particularly Dr. Karve, very fundamental issues of consumption, of production systems, of income distribution, of basically the great disparity that exists in the world, which leads to huge problems. You know, in the old days, 20 years ago, in 1990, when that Human Development Report was published first by UNDP, you had the previous diagram, which we call the champagne glass theory of development, with a 20% or 30%, 20% of people getting about 80 or 90% of the assets and income of the world. Today, we don't talk about 20 and 80 anymore. We talk about 1%. Within the last 25, 30 years, the disparities have grown so great that complete destruction of societies, and now, because of that, for the reasons that Dr. Karve was explaining, the environmental threats have increased. Dr. Dasgupta talked about the ecological footprint, which has grown since independence by a factor of about 4 or 5, and today it runs at 1.8, 1.9, which means we're using up the resources of 2 Indias virtually every year. And there is the whole question of how much growth we can have without destroying the very basis of that growth. Sustainable solutions, well, this is really basically the Kuznets curve, which says that you have societies that are poor and clean have to go through a period of becoming richer and dirtier, and then with their excess profits and surpluses that they generate, they can then pay for cleaning up, and then they can become rich and clean. Well, we don't have the ability to do that anymore. Perhaps that was possible in the US or in Europe, but now it is not possible because of all the reasons I mentioned earlier. So we need to figure out ways to tunnel through. So the development alternatives that we're looking for is how do we tunnel through from being poor to being reasonably prosperous, have everybody in our societies live decent and fulfilling lives, and to do that without having to destroy nature in the process. So this means that we've got to face a totally different approach. The amount of carbon emission per head that we have calculated in IPCC is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is how much material resources per capita we would be able to have in order to attain that carbon emission. And that comes to around 6 tons per capita per year. It will probably end up by being lower than that. And the industrialized countries, which use something of the order of 70, 80 tons per year per capita, and the developing countries, which are much, much lower, are all going to have to make a transition in order to reduce quite drastically, even with the poor countries, the emissions that they have. And instead of the champagne glass or the bar stool that I showed you, what we really need is a glass of water or a glass of beer or something, which has a more meaningful distribution of income for everyone, which is the only way we can decouple the impacts of economic development from resource use, energy, and materials. This graph is about plotting an ecological footprint on the x-axis and human development index on the y-axis. And obviously, you want a society in which you have a low ecological footprint and a high human development index, which means you should be in the top left-hand corner, the green part of it. Well, actually, no country in the world basically gets anywhere close to that. Cuba is the only one that came close, was in that quadrant for a little while, but basically all of us are either here, like in India, at the bottom of the scale for both ecological footprint and human development index, or we're way outside by taking up and destroying nature. So we need different kinds of approaches. This building that you see and is behind me is actually the headquarters of my organization, and it's built almost entirely out of recycled materials. This is what you would call a tribute to circularity. Its use of virgin materials is less than 20% of the total materials used. It's made almost entirely out of recycled materials like demolition waste, like fly ash from power stations, coal-fired power stations, like stone dust from mining operations, and almost all of it is made out of waste materials or recycled materials. We need triple impact technology packages of that type, whether it's in construction, whether it's in mobility, whether it's in agriculture. We've got to now find ways in which we can do much better choice of technologies to make these things work. And then, of course, there's always renewable energy that we need. We need to recycle our water systems. We need to use nature. Biomimicry is going to have to be fundamentally the basis of the future innovations for sustainability. You see this termite hill on the left. Well, that building on the right, which is a building in Harare in Zimbabwe, which is the greenest building in Africa, was built using the principles that the termites use to protect their termite queen and maintain a fixed temperature throughout the year of 24 degrees inside that tower. And this building on the right in Harare is actually the only building there which doesn't use air conditioners because it's been built using natural principles. These beetles that you see on the right there are nature's secret technology for pulling water out of the air. And the University of Oxford, a professor has developed a fabric based on learnings from that beetle, which basically pull water vapor out of the air. So we have a lot of things that we can learn from nature, including making new kinds of cement, including new kinds of automobiles and so on. So we've already talked about the circular economy, so I won't go into that. But basically it means renewables, it means reusing, it means recycling, but it also means much more sophisticated things like refurbishing and remanufacturing, and of course, ultimately conserving, of not using. And all of these are fundamental. The fifth area that I thought I'd just share with you quickly is how to get resource efficiency. This is the basis of achieving all 17 SDGs is going to have to use efficiency of resources. And about 4 years ago, we published a report from the International Resource Panel for G7, which outlined few basic messages. The first core message was that resource efficiency is feasible and it is a win-win. It is the best way to achieve a good part of your climate objectives. Resource efficiency is essential to meeting the SDGs. Key message number 2 is resource efficiency is a must for climate targets. Resource means also material efficiency. Decarbonization is the same as decoupling, and there are many ways to do that, as many people have shown. The third key message is that resource efficiency is actually very good for jobs and economy, something that Dr. Karve described very, very clearly. The fourth message we gave the G7 was that there are many, many options for more resource efficiency-based outcomes. And fifth, that higher resource efficiency is very practical. It's being done and achieved, as Peter Heck showed in very clear terms. So what are the enabling policies? There are limits to the market. The market alone cannot do this. If the prices do not reflect true value and costs of resources, you're not going to get the right answers. If the rewards to capital are out of scale with other inputs, you're not going to get the right answers. If managers are incentivized to make short-term decisions, and all those other ifs that Dipak Dasgupta was talking about, you're not going to get the right answers. Realizing the full potential for carbon emission reduction means that we've got to now have a totally different mix of markets and public policy and, of course, civil society. Civil society is a crucial part of this equation. We need much better information. This is Sankey's diagram, which shows in Metro Manila how the resources and the energy flows through a city. And we've got to be able to find resources, money, finance, to do the kinds of research that you need in order to get things right. So I come close to the end by saying there are things that we have to do at the international level, agreements, SDGs, UN processes, all the kinds of things that are going on, including the Paris Agreement, etc. But we also have to do things at the local and national level, which the previous speakers talked about. The growth of resource productivity is not difficult. If you look here, you will see that resource productivity in the modern sector, in the industrial sector, has grown in all countries, and India is not doing too badly. In fact, it's significantly above the global average, in part because it's a latecomer. It's been able to access newer technologies, which are inherently more resource efficient, and therefore it has been able to take advantage of not being the first mover. Resource productivity, I believe, is meaningful only if it also raises human productivity and the well-being for all. And as Gandhiji would have said, efficiency is meaningful only if it is built on sufficiency. There is not enough in this world for even one man's greed. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ashok Khosla. This was a brilliant, brilliant presentation for all of us. Professor Malik, could you please give some concluding remarks for Dr. Khosla's presentation?
Yes, not just Dr. Khosla, that of course was wonderful, but I think this whole session was very informative, and I'm very grateful for all the experts to have come and contributed. I think we have been enriched this evening in the context of how economy and environment can be synergized, can be working together, and that has been the great lesson of today. I'd like to thank each and every invited speaker. I think every session, every presentation has been a rich source of information. We will follow up with whatever you have given, and of course, tomorrow please join us with the other two sessions, which I'm sure will be equally informative and rewarding.
Sir, we're just going to take a couple of questions from the audience.
Yeah, you can
for the speaker.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so the first question I think is more suitable to Dr. Dipak Dasgupta and Dr. Peter Heck. You can answer this question from your own different perspectives. What do you think about carbon credits as a financial instrument? And could you elaborate on other financial instruments that could help in ecological growth?
Well, if I may start, the carbon credits for us are very important. We have been doing CDM and joint implementation for a long time, so we suffer through all those different carbon credit prices. But of course, if you go for a loan, a bank loan, it's very interesting to get a down payment on carbon emission certificates to organize your equity for the bank loan. So this can make the difference between a normal system, business as usual system, and a very innovative next practice system, because this increments lacking maybe to make it sexy for the economic market for the business people. This could come from the carbon credits basically. And of course, there's a lot of other funding things. If you go for real sustainable systems like no waste systems, like wastewater reduction or reuse or avoidance systems, then normally World Bank, Asian Development Bank, Asia Development Bank, they give you better conditions because they know there's more employment involved, there is a more sustainable money scheme involved, the money is revolving in the region. Now you inject the money and the money is staying in the region because you always generate something, a new value, a new resource. Could be energy, could be material, you're avoiding secondary pollution problems. That's why the funding conditions get better if you go for a real sustainable product. And of course, there are many people today, green investment funds, divestments happening, so decarbonizing, the funds looking for projects who really can show and prove and certify that they are lowering CO2 emissions. And lowering on a gold standard level means lowering CO2 emissions and creating high value jobs. That's why, from my experience, when the other previous speakers, they said it, there's actually no alternative to this. It's economic, but we need to have new economic systems. In the chat, people mentioned this. Governments have to adapt themselves to this new system. So change some policies, change some laws, but this is not impossible. And then I think we will have a lot of nice instruments at hand. And then we only need the people developing projects. You know, right now in Europe, we have much, much more cheap money than good project ideas. So the lack of ideas and projects, and this I think we can hand on to our students. They have a lot of time and great brains to develop projects.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hegg. Dr. Dasgupta, could you please touch upon the question? Should I repeat it?
I think carbon credits are quite fundamental, but we have lots of problems with that. In the sense that somebody has to pay to be able to give carbon credits to those who are making decisions. And there are two parts of this problem. One is that the rich countries of the world have 80% of the savings and resources. They've already crossed. In Germany, there's an excess of savings. And the places like India doesn't have the resources to be able to pay. So you've got to have a system whereby we can bridge this excess savings in places which have no way of using the resources financially and transferring it. And carbon taxes is often proposed as a way of paying for it, but we found that carbon emissions trading systems and others, taxes, it'll take time for us to prepare that. So what we are thinking about is proposing a different concept, which is a social value of mitigation and adaptation actions, or sustainable certificates for social value. So as society starts to recognize, you can attach these certificates to projects that are coming, and hopefully at some point of time, it has to start with government studying cross-border mechanisms to allow that to happen. So let me stop there.
Thank you, sir, for the insightful answer. We have another question coming in for perhaps Dr. Ashok Khosla and Dr. Priyadarshini Karve, who has now joined us. Maybe they could also answer this question with their own different perspectives. The question is as it goes: would affluent people care about adopting sustainable practices when they are doing well as is? Similarly, would poor people who are struggling for basic necessities try to live a more sustainable life, even if they are educated about environmental concerns?
Well, would you like me to say something?
Yes, Dr. Khosla, could you answer this question?
This is a question that reflects how human psychology works. And, you know, I don't want to be too cynical about it, but the rich will probably do only that which is in their own self-interest. And so unless we couch this as a proposition that helps them see that they're fairly immediate, and we're not talking about second generation, third generation, fairly immediate, their lives and their maybe children's lives are going to suffer if they don't do it right and will benefit if they do. But I don't really see people who have made it big in their lives in terms of improved sort of status in the economy, are going to change very much. But the poor, that I'm not sure. I think that question needs to be unasked. That the poor are already hugely conserving of resources. I mean, what resources do they use? They do overutilize certain very fragile resources like topsoil and maybe firewood and so on, which can have an impact, which is lasting and not good. But they're doing that out of the exigencies of survival. They're not doing that because they wish to. I very rarely met poor people in villages who say we want to cut down the forest. They do that because they've got really very little choice. So I'm not sure that these arguments apply to people who are living close to the edges of existence. But for the rich, we've got to figure out ways in which to make them feel that it's in their interest somehow.
Thank you, Dr. Khosla. Dr. Priya, ma'am, are you available?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Should I repeat the question for you?
No, I got the question, and I mostly agree with what Dr. Khosla said, that the question about the poor is a totally wrong one to ask. They are anyway sustainable. Nearly 80% of the resources are being used by the top 20% people. So it is, unless they start changing, things are not going to really change much. And if we want the rich to change, then I think what is missing right now is the big picture vision, which nobody is really talking about. Somebody in another conference asked me that why would rich people choose sustainability? So my answer to that is that whether you want or not, whether you choose or not, human civilization by the end of this century is going to be sustainable. It's just a matter of whether it is going to be 2 billion people sustainable or 10 billion people sustainable. Because the path, I mean, if everything collapses, then it will automatically rebuild sustainably, because a lot of people are going to die. So it then sort of, if you distill it down to individual thinking, then if instead of going from 8 billion to 10 billion, if we are going to go from 8 billion to 2 billion, that effectively means that for the immediate next generation, the chance of reaching the expected human lifespan is only 25%. Do you want to create that kind of a chance for yourself if you are young, or for your next generation if you are old? So it's as simple as that. It's important to bring out that stark reality in the public discourse. That is what is needed for people to start thinking seriously on along these lines. That this shift to sustainable lifestyle is choosing survival for ourselves. That's it. I mean, there are no two ways about it.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you, Priya, ma'am. We have gone literally out of time now, so I would like to conclude today's conference by thanking all the speakers that have spoken excellently on their topics, starting from the first session, and also before that, the inaugural address from Dr. Rajiv Kumar, giving his own insight and brief idea of how India should develop as a developing nation, followed by the setting remarks by Dr. Amitabh Malik. So I would really like to thank the speakers again who have joined us for this day's conference: Dr. Chirag Dara, Dr. Ran Prasad Singh Gupta, Dr. Gurudas Nulkar, Dr. Ashok Khosla, Dr. Dipak Dasgupta, Dr. Peter Heck, and of course, Dr. Priyadarshini Karve. I thank you wholeheartedly for joining this conference and giving your excellent professional insights into this topic. And hopefully we can translate this into some sort of action in the future. So we really hope for your cooperation post the conference, where we try to come up with a policy paper that can drive government change. Professor Malik, would you like to say some concluding remarks?
There is nothing much to say after all this is over. We continue tomorrow. From my side, again, thank you very much, all the speakers. Thank you very much, all the participants. And of course, I must say thank you, my ECC team. You have done a fantastic job. So thank you very much. Goodbye and good night for today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.